In terms of procurement, guys, where do you see the greatest areas of risks for a block of flats and its residents once handed over for occupation or in-scope buildings undergoing refurbishments? So I come to you first, Mark.
Great, thanks, Joe. I mean, I think people will probably have picked up on the golden thread, which is one of the key ideas in this new regime. And you know, the risk is obviously there's the risk of particular constructions, particular products that can be risky, and obviously we all know about ACM and those hazards. But the more fundamental risk and the more fundamental danger is the lack of information and the lack of communication through the process of designing, building, and then managing these buildings. So that's why there's this idea of having a duty holder at each of those stages. So there's the principal design role, there's the principal contractor constructing the building, and then there's the accountable person who's actually responsible for managing the building and appointing a building safety manager to do that day to day. So I think those principles and that golden thread of information through that is the critical issue in terms of reducing risk. And of course, local authorities have a particular role in coming in through as I mentioned earlier, through the building control regime, and through later on down the line the environmental health regime in terms of looking at hazards. And I know we're going to come back to that. So I think for me, there are these tensions in development and in refurbishment between design, building efficiency, and cost. So you'll talk to people who want to design things beautifully, you'll talk to people who want to make buildings work efficiently, and you'll talk to the people who live there who want to keep their costs down at the same time as wanting to be safe. And there are quite a number of tensions in there that we have to make sure are managed effectively. And that's why this new regulator is there, to make sure that we're not pursuing the cheapest route without going for safety. We're not pursuing the most elegant design and then putting ridiculous safety costs on people because we've clad the building in something that looks wonderful but that's really risky. Those are the kinds of trade-offs and debates and tensions that have to be managed. And I think for everybody in the industry, it's about being aware of all of those different issues and working together on them, working together with the manager of the building, with the designer of the building, and with the people who live in the building.
Sure, I think we'll talk more about collaboration later. I mean, do you see any kind of quick wins or areas needing the most change the soonest?
So, I mean, I think one of the things that I'm really concerned about is the recruitment of the staff who are actually going to provide this kind of leadership and this kind of on-the-ground management. Local authorities, landlords, building owners, they're all out there in the marketplace trying to get the right people in. There's going to be a whole issue about competence that I'm sure we'll come back to. And generally, there's just the issue of getting people in early so that you've recruited them and you've got them on board. And even though the detail of the regulations isn't out yet, I think a lot of landlords realize they need to get people appointed early so they can build up that expertise. They can keep at the front of the process of change rather than be catching up all the time and therefore at risk of losing out in terms of the recruitment process, in terms of the training process, and then in terms of delivering and being held accountable by the regulator.
Okay, Alan, do you want to come in on this in terms of the greatest areas of risks for blocks of flats in the procurement process?
Yeah, I think a couple of the issues have been touched on around the golden thread of information. Obviously, there's going to be a sign-off point at Gateway 3, and the information that's required as part of that golden thread. With that then is going to be the maintenance of that information during the lifetime of the building. So it's making sure that following The main role around the building safety regulator, through the design into in occupation, is the ongoing management then of that information to make sure that the information is recorded, is transparent. There's a lot more duties being proposed around transparency, both to residents and other regulators as well, and the availability of that information. So the management of that golden thread doesn't necessarily stop after Gateway 3. It's then into a new management stage whereby that needs to be maintained, and the quality of that needs to be maintained moving forward as well. There are other proposals around the fire safety reform order as well, about almost information boxes within the high-rise residential buildings themselves, whereby residents, regulators, fire and rescue services themselves can gain access to a core of information, and I'm sure that will be based something around the same type of information that would be provided as along with the golden thread. Going on to that then is obviously the competency that backs that up then. It seems like the competency agendas and the competency frameworks is across the board really in terms of where the government is going with this. It's going to affect the building safety bill. There's going to be issues with the fire safety bill itself, and potential reforms around fire risk assessors competencies, regulators themselves. I know certainly in terms of HHSRS assessments, a review is going to consider the competency around HHSRS assessors themselves. Likewise, architects, product safety. There's a whole area around competency frameworks that is then going to feed into that, and then backing that up as well will be the resident responsibilities as well. So as well as the duties that against the accountable persons and the responsible persons are the duties on the residents themselves. They're going to be more refined in terms of written into landlord and tenant leasehold arrangements and whatever else.
Yeah.
So it's the interaction, and Gateway 3 is the end of the beginning almost in terms of the management then of the information from there.
It talks about a hard stop, doesn't it, in terms of those gateways and having that check. So in terms of golden thread,
for sure,
it's going to be critical how companies and landlords digitize and manage that process within their processes and systems. Let's move on.
And it's almost tying in what competent managers are doing already, but it's almost introducing a more defined and clarified statutory minimum almost.